First of all, I want to thank everybody for taking time out of their busy schedules to be with us for this webinar. Very good webinar. We've had a lot of very positive feedback about it. One of the things I will say, it's interesting, you'll have people that will watch it numerous times because unfortunately, Howard gives so much good information that it's really hard to absorb all of it one time around. So we'll have people that will do it 2 or 3 times, and they may come back and visit it down the road and do it again. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Jason Spangler. I'm the division manager here at Wagner. I'm responsible for the concrete side of stuff and the wood side of stuff, basically everything involving flooring. Our full line of hand meters for wood, wood finished floors, wood subfloors, and then the Rapid RH product line. We have a very large number of people on this webinar, and so I may not have enough time to get through everybody's questions. But that being said, if I don't get through your question, or B, if you come up with something down the road, please don't hesitate to give me a call directly. My phone number is 800-634-9961, and it's extension 235. So I'm going to jump into the questions that I have so far. If you come up with some as we go along, please don't hesitate to enter them in. Looks like I have one from Wayne, and he wants to know what is your opinion on using the calcium carbide test. Well, I guess opinions are great from the standpoint of that, and $4 will get me a cup of coffee at Starbucks. But when you look at it as far as what's accepted, at least in most North American markets, calcium carbide testing is not one of them. Some of the feedback is the fact that it is so destructive. The other side of it is that some people feel it's very dangerous. That's why they call it the bomb test, or why it's called the bomb test for short. Again, when you look at what's accepted, at least in the North American market, that doesn't tend to be one of them. So I guess I'll keep my opinion out of it, and I'll just put that out there, for what it is. Ron has a question. And I would say that's going to get a little bit deep, Ron. So probably, if you want, give me a call directly. We can have a discussion about it. Looks like somebody came in with, could we just seal the concrete to avoid all this? Well, you could. There's no doubt. I guess what it comes down to in a lot of applications, though, not to use this pun lightly, but if my arm hurts, I'm not going to go in and just get it amputated. It's one of those things that you need to try to identify how big the problem is before you really figure out what your solution is to it. Just going in and mitigating everything is not really something that tends to be viable for most construction projects, whether it's from a monetary standpoint or from a timing standpoint. John, can I use the Rapid RH on 1 to 2 inch thick gypsum floors? Well, first thing I can say is that the ASTM standard specifically just talks about Portland cement based products. That being said, I do have different manufacturers, as I see you're one of them. I do have some manufacturers that do recognize relative humidity testing for gypcrete. I typically would say, at least with my product, that I would want to see usually inch is going to be pushing it. I want to make sure that the fins on the bottom of the Rapid RH sensor are fully embedded into the gypsum. And then I'm probably still going to be looking at it from a standpoint, I would like it to be thicker than an inch, probably 1.5 inches. But you can then seal around where the sensor interfaces with the gypsum to ensure that you have that entire void of air down there sealed off from the ambient conditions. I would still be looking at comparing the readings that I'm getting in the gypsum at that depth with the ambient conditions, taking ambient readings with a thermal hygrometer, just to make sure there is, a variance, and there's no situation where you're questioning whether they're accurate readings. Again, it's a manufacturer by manufacturer, but That being said, the ASTM standard specifically does not say that we can do it with gypsum, but I have people to do it. Let's see. Michael, when testing on a slab that has an existing floor covering, how large an area of floor needs to be removed to get an accurate test? Well, the nice thing about this, Michael, is that when you look at the science behind the slab and the moisture equilibration in the slab, having that that low permeable membrane on top really is part of the, if you will, the equalizing of the moisture in the slab. That being said, you can actually drill right through the existing floor covering. You don't need to pull anything off of it. You just need to make sure you take into account whatever the thickness is, that you take that away so that you're just looking at 40% of what the actual concrete is. You don't want to do 40% plus the thickness of the or you don't want to include the thickness of the carpet, the grout, the tile, things like that into your overall calculation. Chase, does the building need to be at service conditions to get accurate RH results? ASTM standard F2170 says that you need to have service conditions at the time of testing. So it needs to be 48 hours prior to testing and the entire 72 hours of the testing. Now, if you look at relative humidity testing in comparison to other types of testing, surface-based testing, you'll find that it's not as ambiently biased. But that being said, it still has to be at service conditions if you're making those decisions, you know, from a warranty standpoint, whether it's an adhesive or finished floor covering. Aaron, do you need building to be climate controlled? Again, I just looked at that. The one thing I really do, and I like the fact that the previous question said service conditions, because if you look at some of the other testing methods, you know, via ASTM standards, they'll have very specific parameters for the temperature and very specific parameters for the ambient relative humidity. They say service conditions with relative humidity because you have the ability to use it in some different environments, warehouses, where maybe consistent environmental controls are not going to be something that are 100%. So it allows you to be able to do the testing and to be able to get a good assessment of the slab if you're going to put some kind of coating or something along those lines. I'll have people call me and they'll quote the ASTM standard and say you have to have HVAC on. Technically, based on the wording, you don't have to have HVAC on. Yes, HVAC is going to be the easiest way to ensure that everything is dialed in for the 48 hours and the 72 hours that it's being tested, but it just says it's service conditions. So if you have the ability and you have some kind of temporary environmental controls that will keep the area in question at those service conditions, then you still have something that's a viable test result. People will ask me, what is service conditions? Well, service conditions is what you expect that environment to be when there's people inhabiting it. So if I'm looking at some main street construction and I have, say, a clothing store that's being built, if I was to go, you know, 2 blocks away and find a main street mall and find a clothing store there, and I walked in there with a thermal hygrometer and I looked at what the reasonable environmental conditions, temperature and relative humidity were for that occupied space, that would be what you would probably expect service conditions to be for a like type of building. You'll find that in some construction documents, they'll actually have that kind of stuff specified. But those are just some of the questions that come up. If I look at Gary, currently, do concrete preparation suppliers and adhesive manufacturers specify the acceptable ranges for RH readings for their products? I'm not going to say all of them, but I would say there are definitely quite a few of them out there that do have acceptable levels. What I'll find is that there are people out there, when I say people, there are manufacturers out there or segments of the market that have been earlier to adopt relative humidity. Probably the one at this point that I see that's the furthest behind is the decorative concrete side of stuff and the coatings companies. but they're even starting to catch up with having relative humidity specifications. Usually, if you look in the adhesive manufacturers, concrete subfloor preparation is going to be where you're going to find it. And it will either quote relative humidity. Just make sure you're not looking at it from a relative humidity ambient conditions. Make sure you're looking at it from a, either they'll call out specifically ASTM F2170 or ASTM F1869, depending on which type of moisture testing they accept. And a lot of times it's both. But you should find it in the concrete or subfloor preparation segment or sections. If I were to come back and read a probe that had the cap removed on a busy job site, are the readings now void? They're void from the standpoint of, I mean, in theory, when you look at it per the ASTM standard, yes, it needs to have a cap on it to have an absolute good reading. And I would definitely, in a situation like that, I would definitely put the cap back on it. I would wait the required time period for it to acclimate based on the ASTM standard so that you could have a documented reading saying that, yes, you had the cap on there. Technically, you're going to find, at least in the device that we're talking about here, the Rapid RH, you're going to find there's usually very little unless you have drastic conditions, which you shouldn't. You're going to find there's going to be not a whole lot of difference between the two because the sensor is actually in the bottom side of that hole, and if it's sealed appropriately on the outside of the concrete, the fins are going to keep the sleeve and the void of air at the bottom of the hole completely enclosed. But again, if it's off, ASTM standard says the cap has to be on there, so make sure you put one on there. A lot of times what you'll find is on these busy construction sites is that using a 3-inch, like a bright orange, a red Gorilla Tape, and putting like an X over the top of the cap, and then a lot of times people will put, you know, test site number 1, number 2, so that it helps you to keep track of where your tests are at also, is definitely a great way to coordinate your testing on a job site. When using a non-invasive electrical impedance meter, what value does it give you? For example, 4, 5, or 6, etc. Well, I would say, unfortunately, Drew, that's going to be a question you're going to have to talk to the non-invasive electrical impedance meter manufacturer about. They should be able to give you a very specific understanding of what that represents. For us, it's not something that we manufacture a device like that. And again, in the US, it's not something where most manufacturers have that as a recognized standalone test. It's really intended more for identifying areas to put more quantitative tests like a calcium chloride test or a relative humidity test. All right, well, it looks like that's all we have. Again, if anybody else has any questions or if anything does come up, please don't hesitate to give me a call. Again, my name is Jason Spangler. Phone number is 800-634-9961, and it's extension 235. Thanks, and have a great day.